The sucking mesmerized me. The warm struggling of the man was soothing to the tension of my hands, and there came the beating of the drum again, which was the drum beat of his heart, only this time it beat in perfect rhythm with the drum beat of my own heart, the two resounding in every fiber of my being until the beat began to grow slower, and the slower so that each was a soft rumble that threatened to go on without end. I was drowsing, falling into weightlessness, and then Lestat pulled me back. "He's dead, you idiot," he said with his characteristic charm and tact. "You don't drink after they're dead. Understand that." I was in a frenzy, for a moment not myself, insisting him that the man's heart still beat, and I was in agony to clamp onto him again. I ran my hands over his chest and then grabbed at his wrists. I would have cut into him if Lestat hadn't pulled me to my feet and slapped my face. The slap was astonishing. It was not painful in the ordinary way. It was a sensational shock of another sort, a rapping of the senses, so that I spun in confusion and found myself helpless and staring, my back against a cypress, the night pulsing with insects in my ear. "You'll die if you do that," Lestat was saying. "He'll suck you right down into death with him if you cling to him in death. And now you've drunk too much. Besides, you'll be ill." His voice grated on me. I had the urge to throw myself on him suddenly, but I was feeling just what he'd said. There was a grinding pain in my stomach, as if some whirlpool there were sucking my insides into itself. It was the blood passing too rapidly into my own blood, but I didn't know it. Lestat moved through the night now like a cat, and I followed him, my head throbbing, this pain in my stomach no better when we reached the house of Pont de Lac. As we sat at the table in the parlor, Lestat dealing a game of solitaire on the polished wood, I sat there staring at him with contempt. He was mumbling nonsense. I would get used to killing, he said. It would be nothing. I must not allow myself to be shaken. I was reacting too much, as if the mortal coil had not been shaken off. I would become accustomed to things all too quickly. "Do you think so?" I asked him finally. I really had no interest in his answer. I understood now the difference between us. For me, the difference of killing had been cataclysmic. So had the sucking of Lestat's wrist. These experiences so overwhelmed and so changed my view of everything around me, from the picture of my brother on the parlor wall to the sight of a single star in the topmost pane of the French window, that I could not imagine another vampire taking them for granted. I was altered permanently. I knew it, and what I felt most profoundly, for everything, even the sound of the playing cards being laid down one by one upon the shining rows of the solitaire, was respect. Lestat felt the opposite, or he felt nothing. He was the sow's ear out of which nothing fine could be made. As boring as a mortal, as trivial and unhappy as a mortal, he chattered over the game, belittling my experience, uttering locked against the possibility of any experience of his own. By morning, I realized that I was his complete superior, and I had been sadly cheated in having him for a teacher. He must guide me through the necessary lessons, if there were any more real lessons, and I must tolerate in him a frame of mind which was blasphemous to life itself. I felt cold towards him. I had no contempt and superiority, only a hunger for new experience, for that which was beautiful and as devastating as my kill. And I saw that if I were to maximize every experience available to me, I must exert my own powers over my learning. Lestat was of no use. It was well past midnight when I finally rose out of the chair and went out onto the gallery. The moon was large over the cypresses, and the candlelight poured from the open doors. The thick, plastered pillars and walls of the house had been freshly whitewashed, the floorboards freshly swept, and the summer rain had left the night clean and sparkling with drops of water. I leaned against the end pillar of the gallery, my head touching the soft tendrils of a jasmine, which grew there in constant battle with the wisteria, and I thought of what lay before me throughout the world and throughout time, and resolved to go about it delicately and reverently, learning that from each thing would take me best to another. What this meant, I wasn't sure myself. Do you understand me when I say I did not wish to rush headlong into experience? That what I'd felt as a vampire was far too powerful to be wasted? Yes, said the boy eagerly. It sounds as if it was like being in love. The vampire's eyes gleamed. That's correct. It is like love. He smiled. And I tell you my frame of mind that night, so you can know there are profound differences between vampires, and how I came to take a different approach from Lestat. You must understand, I did not snub him because he did not appreciate his experience. I simply could not understand how such feelings could be wasted. But then Lestat did something which was to show me a way to go about my learning. He had a more than a casual appreciation of the wealth at Point de Luc. He'd been much pleased by the beauty of the china used for Father's supper, and he liked the feel of the velvet drapes, and he traced patterns onto the carpets with his toe. And now he took from one of the china closets a crystal glass and said, I do miss glasses. Only he said this with an impish delight that caused me to study him with a hard eye. I disliked him intensely. I want to show you a little trick, he said. That is, if you like glasses. And after setting it out on the card table, he came on to the gallery where I stood and changed his manner again into that of a stalking animal, eyes piercing the dark beyond, the lights of the house peering down the arching branches of the oaks. In an instant, he had vaulted the railing and dropped softly on the dirt below, and then lunged into the blackness to catch something in both his hands. When he stood before me with it, I gasped to see it was a rat. Don't be such a damned idiot, he said. Haven't you ever seen a rat? It was huge, struggling field rat with a long tail. He held its neck so it couldn't bite. Rats can be quite useful, he said, and he took the rat to the wine glass, slashed its throat, and filled the glass rapidly with the blood. The rat then went hurtling over the gallery railing, and Lestat held the wine glass to the candle triumphantly. You may, well, have to live off rats from time to time, so wipe that expression off your face, he said. Rats, chickens, cattle, traveling by ship. You damn well better live off rats. if you don't wish to cause such a panic on board when they search your coffin. You damn well better keep the ship clean of rats. And then he sipped the blood as delicately as if it were burgundy. He made a slight face. It gets cold so fast. Do you mean then we can live from animals? I asked. Yes. He drank it all down and then casually threw the glass at the fireplace. I stared at the fragments. You don't mind, do you? He gestured to the broken glass with a sarcastic smile. I surely hope you don't, because there's nothing much you can do about it if you do mind. I can throw you and your father out of Pont du Lac if I mind, I said. I believe this was my first show of temper. Why would you do that? He asked with mock alarm. You don't know everything yet, do you? He was laughing then, walking around slowly about the room. He ran his fingers over the satin finish of the spinet. Do you play? He asked. I said something like, Don't touch it, and he laughed at me. I'll touch it if I like, he said. You don't know, for example, all the ways you can die, and dying now would be such a calamity, wouldn't it? There must be someone else in the world to teach me these things, I said. Certainly, you're not the only vampire, and your father, he, perhaps 70? You couldn't have been a vampire long, so someone must have instructed you. And do you think you can find other vampires by yourself? They might see you coming, my friend, but you won't see them. No, I don't think you have much choice about things at this point, friend. I'm your teacher, and you need me, and there isn't much you can do about it either way, and we both have people to provide for. My father needs a doctor. And then there is the matter of your mother and sister. Don't get any immortal notions about telling them you are a vampire. Just provide for them and for my father, which means that tomorrow night you had better kill fast, and then attend to the business of your plantation. Now to bed. We both sleep in the same room. It makes for far less risk. No. You secure the bedroom yourself, I said. I've no intention of staying in the same room with you. He became furious. Don't do anything stupid, Louis. I warn you. There's nothing you can do to defend yourself once the sun rises. Nothing. Separate rooms mean separate security, double precautions, and double chance of notice. He then said a score of things to frighten me into complying. But he might as well have been talking to the walls. I watched him intently, but I didn't listen to him. He appeared frail and stupid to me. A man made of dried twigs with a thin, carping voice. I sleep alone, I said, and gently put my hand around the candle flames, one by one. It's almost morning, he insisted. So lock yourself in, I said, embracing my coffin, hoisting it and carrying it down the brick stairs. I could hear the locks snapping on the French doors above, the swoosh of drapes. The sky was pale, but still sprinkled with the stars. And another light rain blew now on the breeze from the river, speckling the flagstones. I opened the door of my brother's oratory, shoving back the roses and thorns which had almost sealed it, and set the coffin on the stone floor beside the prie-dieu. I could almost make out the images of the saints on the walls. Paul, I said softly, addressing my brother. For the first time in my life, I feel nothing for you, nothing for your death, and for the first time I feel everything for you. Feel the sorrow of your loss, as if I never knew the feeling. You see, the vampire turned to the boy. For the first time now, I was fully and completely a vampire. I shut the wood blinds flat upon the small barred windows and bolted the window and doors. Then I climbed into the satin-lined coffin, barely able to see the gleam of cloth in the darkness, and locked myself in. That is how I became a vampire. And there you were, said the boy, after a pause, with another vampire you hated. But I had to stay with him, answered the vampire. And as I've told you, he had me at a great disadvantage. He hinted there was much I didn't know, and must know, and that he alone could tell me. But in fact, the main part of what he did teach me was practical, and not so difficult to figure out for oneself. How we might travel, for instance, by ship, having our coffins transported for us, as though they contained the remains of loved ones, being sent here or there for burial. How no one would dare to open such a coffin, and we might rise from it at night to clean the ship of rats. Things of this nature. And then there were the shops and businessmen he knew who admitted us well after hours to outfit us in the finest Paris fashions, and those agents willing to transact financial matters in restaurants and cabarets. And in all of these mundane matters, Lestat was an adequate teacher. What manner of man he had been in life I couldn't tell and didn't care, but he was, for all appearances, of the same class now as myself, which meant little to me except that it made our lives run a little more smoothly than they might have otherwise. He had impeccable taste, though my library to him was a pile of dust, and he seemed more than once to be influenced by the sight of my reading a book or writing some observations in a journal. That's mortal nonsense, he would say to me, while at the same time spending so much of my money to splendidly furnish Pont de Lac that even I, who cared nothing for the money, was forced to wince. And in entertaining visitors at Pont de Lac, those hapless travelers who came up the river road by horseback or carriage, begging accommodations for the night, sporting letters of introduction from the other planters or officials in New Orleans. To these he was so gentle and polite that it made things far easier for me, who found myself hopelessly locked to him and jarred over and over by his viciousness. But he didn't harm these men? Asked the boy. Oh yes, often he did. But I'll tell you a little secret, if I may, which applies not only to vampires, but to generals, soldiers, and kings. Most of us would much rather see somebody die than be the object of rudeness under our roofs. Strange, yes, but very true, I assure you. That Lestat hunted for mortals every night, I knew.